Imagine waking up in a small mud brick house in the ancient Near East.
Right, way before any modern conveniences.
Yeah, and the sun isn't even up yet, but you can already feel the heat baking the limestone
No,
outside.
absolutely brutal heat.
You walk over to the corner of the room where you keep your large clay water jar and you tip it forward. You're expecting that heavy, satisfying slosh of water.
But you feel nothing.
Nothing at all. The jar is light, you tilt it further, and there's no sound. You run your hand inside, and it is just bone dry.
That's a terrifying moment in that context.
It really is. In that specific moment, this cold panic washes over you. That lack of water is not just a minor inconvenience, it's an immediate threat to your survival.
Yeah, it's life or death.
So that visceral, terrifying realization of physical lack is where we are starting today. Welcome to Reformed Thinking. I'm so glad you're joining us for this deep dive into the source material.
It's going to be a fascinating discussion.
We are going to look at the ancient concept of emptiness.
That scenario you just described captures the physical stakes perfectly.
Yeah.
Because, when we study ancient languages, we really have to strip away our modern safety nets.
Oh, for sure. Like, if your faucet runs dry today, what do? You call a plumber. Or you run to the store and buy some bottled water.
Yeah, it's a hassle. But you aren't going to die. In the ancient world, a dry well or an empty grain silo meant famine.
It meant your family was in serious trouble.
Spot on. The vocabulary they developed to describe these situations carried immense psychological weight. We're looking at a linguistic framework that built its most abstract philosophical ideas straight out of these terrifying physical realities.
I always find it super interesting how our daily environment completely shapes the way we think.
It dictates everything.
It does. So the mission for our deep dive today is to unpack this very concept by examining two closely related ancient Hebrew words. We're looking at rik and rak.
And they both derive from the same root word, ruk.
Yes, ruk. To really get a handle on this, we have pulled together a massive stack of source material for you. We're looking at rigorous Hebrew lexicons and theological dictionaries.
Really heavy-hitting stuff.
Yeah, specifically the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament and the Lunita Lexicon.
Those are fantastic for getting into the semantic domains.
And we've also brought in some scholarly commentaries to help us translate these concepts. We have the Anchor Yale Bible, the New International Commentary, and the Expositor's Bible Commentary.
All excellent sources for this kind of rigorous analysis.
We want to understand how the ancient Hebrew mind conceptualized nothingness. We're tracing a path from literal empty jars all the way to cosmic utility and total moral bankruptcy.
What stands out in these sources is just the sheer consistency of the concept across the broader linguistic landscape.
It wasn't just them.
Right. This is not some isolated quirk of Hebrew.
Yeah.
If you look at the cognate languages across the ancient Near East, they all share this absolute dread of the void.
Oh, wow. So where else do we see it?
Well, you see it in Akkadian with the word rikutu, which was used to describe something void or unoccupied.
Okay.
You find it in Syriac as raikanita, and it shows up in various Aramaic dialects too. The whole region shared a common terror of the void.
That makes sense given the climate.
Yeah, and the trajectory we'll follow today is really striking. We'll start with those physical containers you mentioned, then look at how the language evolved to describe human actions.
And then into spiritual delusions, right?
Yes, and finally human character.
Okay, let's unpack this from the ground up. Because to understand the philosophy, we have to start with the dirt.
The tactile reality.
Right. The ancient Near East was a highly tactile place. People dealt with the physical elements of survival on a daily basis.
They had their hands in the soil.
So the lexicons start by defining the adjective forms, rek or reka. These are the words used to describe physical objects that are holding or containing nothing.
And the sense antonym, the opposite meaning, is simply full.
But my question for you and for the listener is, why focus on the emptiness? Consider the difference between picking up your morning coffee cup and finding it unexpectedly empty.
Which is annoying.
Very annoying. But compare that physical reality to dealing with a friend's empty promise, or waking up and feeling like your entire life is empty.
The stakes get higher and higher.
They really do. The physical reality of the cup somehow provides the actual vocabulary for the existential crisis of the soul.
Well, the physical reality is the only way human beings can initially grasp the abstract. You have to start with what you can touch.
That makes total sense.
The primary dictionary definition in the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament refers to a vessel that is simply unoccupied. But the biblical narratives use this word to highlight something far more significant than just a misplaced object.
Where do we see that first?
Let us look at Genesis 37, specifically verse 24. This is the historical account of Joseph.
Oh, right, with his brothers.
Yeah. His brothers have conspired against him out of pure jealousy. They strip him of his ornate robe and throw him into a pit out in the wilderness of Dothan.
A pretty brutal scene.
Very. But the Hebrew text adds a very specific detail. It says, and the pit was empty, using our word rek.
You know, I have read that story dozens of times, and I always glossed over that detail. It feels almost redundant.
How so?
Well, why does the text bother specifying the pit is empty? If you throw a teenager into a hole in the ground and he doesn't immediately drown, the reader assumes there's no water in it.
That's a fair point.
Right. If it were full of rocks, he wouldn't fall very far. Why take the linguistic real estate to add the adjective wreck?
If we connect this to the geographical realities of Canaan, a pit in this context is actually a cistern.
Okay, so it's man-made.
Yes. These were massive underground chambers, often carved into solid limestone. They were designed with a narrow opening at the top.
Like a bottleneck.
Yeah, exactly. And they were plastered on the inside specifically to catch and hold runoff water during the brief winter rains.
So it's not just a random ditch.
Not at all. In an arid climate, a working cistern was the difference between a thriving flock and a dead one.
Wow. Okay.
So the Lunita lexicon in domain 59.35 to 59.43 defines this specific type of emptiness as the state or condition of a quantity of space not occupied.
Not occupied.
Right. A cistern is completely defined by its ability to occupy space with water. For it to be wreck meant it had utterly failed its created purpose. It was a broken system.
That's just the whole perspective on the scene for me. Joseph isn't just sitting in a random hole in the ground. He's sitting inside a monumental failure of survival.
It's an aggressive void.
The void around him is a physical representation of death. The unoccupied space itself is the threat.
You nailed it. The text uses wreck to point out the total desolation of his circumstances.
He's got nothing.
He is surrounded by a void that offers absolutely nothing to sustain his life. The emptiness is a real danger. And we see this strategic use of a physical void again, actually, in a military context.
Oh, right, the Gideon story.
Yes. In Judges 7.1 scene, we encounter the historical narrative of Gideon. He is facing an overwhelming invasion by the Midianite army.
And they were just wrecking the place, right?
Oh, completely devouring the harvest like locusts. Gideon gathers an army, but through a series of tests, his forces are reduced down to just 300 men.
Which is nothing compared to a massive coalition.
It's an impossible situation. To face them, he arms his small band, not with state-of-the-art bronze weaponry, but with trumpets and empty pitchers.
Empty pitchers.
Yeah, the Hebrew word is the plural, rekim.
This has to be one of the most bizarre tactical decisions in ancient warfare. I mean, they hide burning torches inside these empty clay jars.
Right.
They sneak to the edge of the Midianite camp in the dead of night, blow the trumpets, and smash the clay all at once.
Creating massive chaos.
Yeah, the sudden noise and the burst of light from 300 different directions create this massive psychological shock. It causes the Midianites to panic and turn on each other in the dark.
But the tactical brilliance of that relies entirely on the jars being wrecked.
How do you mean?
Think about the physics of it. If the jars contained even a tiny remnant of olive oil,
Oh, the torches would have ignited the oil.
yes, they would have flared up prematurely, ruining the whole stealth approach. Or, if they contained grain residue, they might have smothered the flame entirely.
So they had to be completely clean.
The jars had to be absolute voids. They functioned as a dark housing, like a portable vacuum, protecting the fire until the precise moment it was needed.
That's incredible. The text highlights the emptiness because the emptiness is actually the weapon.
Yes, and here's where it gets really interesting. We go from an empty pit as a place of death to empty jars as weapons of war, and then we arrive at empty vessels as the prerequisite for a miracle.
Right. In 2 Kings 4.
Correct. The prophet Elisha is approached by a widow from the company of the prophets. Her husband has died, leaving her in massive debt.
And the creditor is coming for her boys, right?
Yes, coming to take her 2 boys as slaves. This was a brutal economic reality in ancient Israel.
Just devastating.
She tells Elisha that she has absolutely nothing in the house except a small jar of olive oil.
Which is barely anything.
Right. So Elisha gives her a very specific set of instructions. He tells her to go outside, go to all her neighbors, and borrow vessels. But he adds a qualifier. Borrow empty vessels, and do not gather just a few.
The New International Commentary spends some real time analyzing this exchange. The widow's situation is the ultimate picture of being hollowed out.
She's completely empty herself.
She has lost her husband, she's about to lose her children, and her physical resources are non-existent. Elisha's command to gather empty vessels, those rikim, forces her to confront her lack on a massive scale.
It's a very public display of her poverty.
Yeah, she has to go door to door, publicly gathering containers that hold nothing. She's literally accumulating voids.
It's a striking image.
But the miraculous provision of God, the multiplying of the oil, can only occur where there is space to receive it. The miracle requires the void.
The oil flows as long as there's an empty vessel to catch it.
Right, and once the last rick vessel is full, the oil stops.
I love that image. The unoccupied space isn't a limitation for God. It's the Kansas.
That's a great way to put it.
But the physical dread of emptiness never completely leaves the ancient mind. There's one more historical example from the sources that brings the terror of the void back into focus.
Is this the Pharaoh story?
Yes, in Genesis 41, the Pharaoh of Egypt has a series of disturbing dreams. Now, Egypt's entire economy and survival were based on the predictable flooding of the Nile River.
If Nile didn't flood, they didn't eat.
Spot on. So in his second dream, Pharaoh sees 7 plump, healthy ears of grain growing on a single stalk. Then 7 thin ears, scorched by the east wind, sprout up and swallow the healthy ears.
Just a bizarre, terrifying dream.
And the Hebrew text uses our word to describe those ruined, blighted ears of grain as empty.
The commentaries note an interesting literary parallel here, actually. The Roman poet Virgil, writing centuries later, used the Latin phrase vanus aristas, which translates to vain or empty ears of grain, to describe a similar agricultural catastrophe.
It's universal dread.
An empty ear of grain is a terrifying paradox. It has the outward appearance and structure of food, but it lacks the actual caloric substance. It is a deception.
It looks full, but it's rick.
Right. For the Pharaoh of Egypt to dream of empty grain was a harbinger of absolute disaster. It meant the Nile would fail, the crops would wither, and the entire nation would starve.
The physical state of being empty carried a staggering psychological terror.
I want you to think about how a physical lack dictates human behavior even today. Like if you log into your banking app and see an empty account,
Panic sets in.
total panic. Or if you open your refrigerator and see empty shelves, that lack instantly alters your reality. It creates a huge spike of cortisol.
It completely changes your plans for the day.
You immediately begin operating out of a state of deficit. Your mind starts racing to figure out how to fill the void. The ancient fear of the empty grain in Pharaoh's dream is the exact same visceral reaction we have to lack today.
The space is unoccupied, and that unoccupied space screams at you, demanding a resolution.
It's so loud.
That framing sets up the next phase of our investigation perfectly, because the state of being empty demands a response. A void is rarely static for long,
Something usually rushes in to fill it.
or an outside force acts upon it. This takes us from looking at emptiness as an adjective, a static condition describing a jar, a pit, or a stalk of grain, to looking at the active, sometimes violent process of creating that emptiness.
Okay, so we're moving into the realm of the verbs.
Exactly. Let's walk through this action of emptying. The lexicons show us that the Hebrew verbs, derived from the root rook, take on different grammatical forms to express different nuances of action.
What forms are we looking at?
We're looking specifically at the heb-fill form.
That's the causative form, right? Meaning to cause something to be empty.
Yes. And we'll also look at the ho-full form, which is the passive, meaning to be emptied out by someone or something else.
Okay, let's unpack this. How is the have-fill form used literally?
The literal usage is very straightforward. It describes the physical action of pouring something out. In Genesis 42.35, Joseph's brothers are returning from Egypt.
They've got their grain sacks.
Right. They stop at an encampment, and the text says they were emptying their sacks of grain. They are physically causing the containers to become empty.
Very literal.
Right. And in Psalm 18.43, the psalmist uses the same verb to describe emptying out a container of debris. But the Lunita semantic domains reveal some incredible figurative extensions of this physical action.
Ancient Hebrew is a highly concrete language, isn't it?
Yes, they didn't invent detached abstract vocabulary for complex ideas. They used tactile physical actions to describe physiological and political events.
The dictionary definitions here are fascinating. Let's look at how they use this verb for the concept of starving.
It's a very vivid image.
In Isaiah 32.6, the prophet is describing the actions of a wicked fool. He says the fool works iniquity, utters error, and leaves the hungry soul empty.
And Lunita expands on that perfectly.
They really do. The Lunita lexicon explains that this specific usage of the causative verb means lacking food in the stomach as a figurative extension of pouring out a mass from a container.
It is a brilliant but terrifying linguistic picture. The Hebrew mind conceptualized the human body as a vessel.
So a famine isn't just missing a meal.
No. When you endure famine, when you go without food, you aren't just experiencing a biological process. You are literally emptying the container of your physical being.
Wow. Famine is causing your stomach to be poured out.
A starvation is an active unmaking of the human vessel.
That's intense. And the imagery gets even more intense when we move from agriculture out onto the battlefield.
Oh, the sword imagery.
Yeah. The sources show that drawing a weapon, specifically brandishing a sword, is described using this exact same causative verb for emptying.
Where do we see that first?
In Exodus 15.9, this is during the Song of the Sea, right after the Israelites crossed the Red Sea. They sing about the arrogance of the Egyptian army.
They're recounting the enemy's boasts.
Right. The enemy boasts, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will draw my sword. But the literal Hebrew translation is, I will empty my sword.
Empty my sword. It's such a striking phrase.
And we see this idiom repeated constantly. Leviticus 26.33 talks about God emptying a sword after the disobedient nation. Psalm 35.3, and multiple times in Ezekiel chapters 5 and 12, the prophets speak of emptying the sword.
This really highlights the visceral creativity of the ancient Near Eastern mind. They viewed the scabbard, or the sheath, as a container.
So pulling the sword out is pouring it out.
Right, to draw the sword for combat is to cause the sheath to become empty. But the commentaries agree that it goes far beyond just unsheathing a piece of metal.
Especially in the prophets.
Yes, in the context of these passages, particularly the covenant judgments in Leviticus and Ezekiel, emptying the sword carries the immense weight of unleashing violence upon a population.
It's like a flood.
Exactly. The sword is a fluid force of destruction that is literally poured out over the land.
I am trying to picture that mental leap. You aren't just pulling iron off your belt, you are tipping over a container that holds death. And you are pouring that death onto the battlefield. It makes the abstract concept of starting a war incredibly tactile. You cause a void in the scabbard, but you flood the world with violence.
It's a huge metaphor. And there are two more surprising verbal extensions listed in the Lunita domains that show the versatility of this word.
What's the first one?
The first is the act of calling out or summoning a group of people from a distance.
How does that relate to emptying?
Well, in Genesis 14.14, we read the account of Abram rescuing his nephew Lot, who had been taken captive by a coalition of kings.
Right, he takes his trained men.
The text says Abram led forth his trained men, but the verb used for leading them forth is connected to this idea of emptying. He caused his household to be empty.
Oh, I see.
He called them all out for the rescue mission, leaving the physical space of his encampment unoccupied. The emptying of the house was the mobilization of the army.
So the focus is entirely on the space left behind. He literally poured his men out onto the plains.
Yes. The other extension is found in the post-exilic book of Malachi.
Chapter 3, right.
Specifically chapter 3, verse 10. This is the famous passage where God challenges the people to bring the full tithe into the storehouse.
Right, test me in this.
Test me in this, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it.
And the verb translated as pour out, there is our Hefel form of rook.
Spot on. The lexicon categorizes this usage as fully experiencing, meaning to cause one to have a personal, overwhelming experience.
So it's not just a little trickle of blessing.
Not at all. The blessing is conceptualized as a massive substance held in a heavenly container. God physically tips that container over and empties its contents onto the recipient until they are completely overwhelmed by the experience.
The physicality of the language is relentless. Whether you're starving in a famine, fighting in a vanguard, shouting for your troops to mobilize, or receiving a massive blessing from heaven, the language insists that you imagine a vessel being tipped over.
Someone is always pouring something out.
Always. And that brings us to the passive form, the hufel. This grammatical form means to be poured out, or to be emptied by an outside force. We see a poetic use of this in Song of Solomon 1.3, where a lover's name is described as perfume poured out.
The scent fills the room because the jar has been emptied.
But we see a much more ominous use in Jeremiah 48.11. The prophet is delivering an oracle against the nation of Moab.
That's a tough passage.
Very. He describes Moab as wine that has settled on its dregs. The text says Moab has been at ease from youth and has not been emptied from vessel to vessel.
So Moab's been sitting still. They haven't been disturbed.
Exactly. But the implication of the Hofal form is what matters here. When the time comes for the pouring, if you are the wine being poured or the vessel being emptied, it implies a total loss of agency.
You have absolutely no control over the action.
None. You are just the liquid or you are just the jar. If external forces, whether that's a conquering Babylonian army or the decree of God, decide to turn you upside down, you lose everything inside.
You are entirely at the mercy of whoever holds the handle.
I have never thought about the loss of agency in those terms. If you are the one holding the sword, you are emptying it. You are in control. But if you are the vessel being emptied, you are helpless.
It's a frightening position to be in.
It really is. This seems to push our investigation into a very dark psychological space. When we move from the physical action of pouring to the actual results of that action, we hit a wall. What happens when you pour yourself out and there's nothing to show for it?
This brings us to the tragedy of futility. We've established what it means to be an empty pot, and we've analyzed the physical action of emptying something out.
Right.
Now lexicons guide us into the existential dread of ancient life, the terror that human effort itself might result in complete nothingness.
You put in all the work for zero return.
You work until your bones ache, you pour your strength out into the soil, but the result is a void.
The sources outline the adverbial phrases used for this concept, lyrique and lyrique. These translate to phrases like in vain or for nothing.
We see this starkly in the covenant curses outlined in Leviticus 26.
God is setting the terms of the covenant with the newly formed nation of Israel there, right?
Yes, he lists the blessings for obedience and then the severe consequences for breaking the covenant. In verses 16 and 20, God warns the people that if they turn away, they will sow their seed in vain.
Meaning the seed just dies in the dirt?
Pretty much. Their strength will be spent for nothing. They will labor intensely, but they will receive no benefit because their enemies will eat the harvest, or the land itself will simply refuse to yield its produce.
To really understand the weight of this, we have to grasp the brutal reality of ancient farming. We aren't talking about modern mechanized agriculture.
No tractors back then.
Sowing seed in the rocky, terraced hills of Canaan involved backbreaking labor. You're using oxen to pull a wooden plow through stubborn dirt under a blazing sun.
And you are carefully rationing your seed grain, just hoping the early and latter rains fall at the precise right times.
To do all of that physical labor, to spend your strength entirely, and then harvest absolutely nothing, to sow lyrique means your family starves when the winter comes.
It's a total disaster. The Lunita lexicon, in domain 89.39 to 89.54, defines this specific type of vanity or nothingness as a state or condition not having any advantage, benefit, or result.
I am struggling to see how people handled that mentally. We all know the feeling of having a bad day at the office. You answer 100 emails, you sit in endless meetings, and at 5 o'clock you feel like you accomplished zero actual work.
It's frustrating.
You say, well, that was a massive waste of time. But the scale here is totally different. The ancient concept of Rick, this futility, is not just annoyance. It's a threat to your very existence.
The prophets use this concept of futility to express huge spiritual and cosmic frustration.
Yeah.
We see the prophet Isaiah using this extensively.
In chapter 49, I think.
Yes, in Isaiah 49.4, the servant of the Lord cries out, I have labored in vain, I have spent my strength for nothing in vanity.
He's exhausted.
He has poured himself out for the restoration of Israel, and he looks at the results and sees an unoccupied space. Conversely, in Isaiah 65.23, when the prophet describes the promise of the new heavens and the new earth, he specifically includes the promise that the people shall not labor in vain.
The curse of the void will be lifted.
Exactly. Even the wisdom literature uses it. Job 39.16 describes the ostrich treating her young harshly, her labor being in vain because she lacks wisdom to protect her eggs.
The sources point out another very specific phrase in the Hebrew, bederik, which means for nothing or for no purpose. We find this phrase in Jeremiah 51.58 and the parallel passage in Habakkuk 2.13.
These passages zoom out from the individual farmer and describe whole empires exhausting themselves for nothing.
It's a macro-level futility.
Jeremiah is pronouncing judgment on Babylon. He says the broad walls of Babylon will be leveled, her high gates burned with fire. And then he concludes, the peoples exhaust themselves for nothing and the nations weary themselves only for the fire.
Anja's exegetical and critical commentary on Jeremiah 51 spends a significant amount of time analyzing the sheer scale of this exhaustion.
Because Babylon was enormous.
Think about the Babylonian Empire. They built massive architectural wonders. The Ishtar Gate, the ziggurats, the impenetrable defensive walls, millions of man-hours, immense caloric output, slaves and citizens laboring for decades to build a monument to human achievement.
And the prophetic word declares that all of that labor is bidirik. It's just fuel for the eventual fire.
All their defense systems, all their striving is, in the end, just kindling.
When the Hebrew scholars centuries later translated these Old Testament texts into Greek, the translation known as the Septuagint, they had to find Greek equivalents for this Hebrew dread.
What words did they use?
They used words like kinos, meaning empty, mataios, meaning vain, and matiodos, meaning vanity.
Matiodu. That is the word famously used in the Greek translation of Ecclesiastes, right? Vanity of vanities, all is vanity.
Yes, and these Greek concepts perfectly capture the cosmic frustration happening in the Hebrew text. It is a fundamental rupture between human effort and the natural harvest.
You do the work, but you get no reward.
You put the massive amount of work in, but the universe actively refuses to give you the crop. The equation is broken.
It's the feeling of carrying a heavy bucket of water for miles, your muscles burning, your lungs burning, only to realize when you get home that there is a massive hole in the bottom of the bucket.
All that effort for nothing.
You did the work, but there is no water. I think about modern pursuits, and I wonder how much of our cultural burnout comes from this exact same ancient feeling.
It's highly relatable.
People exhaust themselves climbing corporate ladders, taking on massive debt to acquire status symbols, or pouring hours into curating a digital life. They climb to the top of the hill only to realize the bucket is completely rick. It's empty.
The exhaustion is totally real.
But the benefit, the actual substance of life, is zero. We are wearying ourselves for the fire.
That is a very accurate modern parallel. The human drive to build walls and acquire resources hasn't changed, and neither has the despair when those things fail to satisfy.
It's a vicious cycle.
And this pushes our analysis into the next crucial phase. If massive amounts of human effort are resulting in physical and existential futility, we have to ask why.
Why are whole populations laboring for nothing?
The textual sources suggest that empty efforts are very often the direct result of believing in empty concepts. Our actions are dictated by our beliefs.
But this moves us from the physical world into the mind.
We enter the space of delusion and idolatry.
So we are transitioning from an empty jar or a wasted crop to an empty thought. The lexicons show us the noun usage of rick translated as a vain thing or a delusion.
Psalm 2.1 is a prime example of this mental void.
The psalmist asks, why do the nations rage and the peoples plot a vain thing? Mitchell Dahood's notes in the Anchor Yale Bible commentary spend a lot of time analyzing this specific phrasing.
Dahood does a great job with that.
The nations are actively conspiring. They are having diplomatic meetings, they are sharpening swords, they are forming alliances. The physical plotting is very real. But the object of their plotting, the goal they are meditating on, is a void.
They are attempting to successfully overthrow the established sovereign order of heaven. They believe they can break the bonds of the Creator.
Which is impossible.
Dahood points out that this belief is rick. It has no substance. It is a mathematical impossibility. And we see an even more intimate, devastating version of this in Psalm 4.3.
What happens there?
The psalmist is addressing his enemies, likely men of high status, and he asks them, "How long will you love vain words and seek after lies?" The Hebrew phrase literally reads that they love an empty thing.
Love an empty thing. That has to be one of the most tragic accusations in the entire text. You're taking the most powerful human emotion, the capacity for devotion and love, and you are aiming it directly into a vacuum.
It is a devastating critique of the human heart.
It really is.
Bruce Waltke's commentary on Psalm 4 gives us the necessary historical context to understand what was actually happening in Israel when this was written.
Right, because they weren't just sitting around inventing philosophies.
No. He notes that this psalm is an accusation against the highborn, the elite members of society. They are experiencing an agricultural crisis, likely a severe drought.
The ground is turning to dust.
Instead of trusting the covenant of God and repenting, they apply a pragmatic, ancient, Near Eastern solution. They turn to the local Canaanite deities, specifically the storm god, Baal, to bring the rain.
I always pictured idolatry as just a random religious preference, but it was actually an agricultural insurance policy.
It was survival tactics.
They needed rain, so they went to the god who supposedly controlled the thunderclouds. So they are praying, they are building altars, they are offering expensive sacrifices, they are performing intricate rituals. To the people involved, it feels incredibly full of action and devotion.
Yes, The rituals were highly complex and demanded immense resources. But the Lunita lexicon categorizes this specific usage of Rick in domain 70. Delusions, fantasies, i.e. that which is unreal and has no actual existence, in fact.
No actual existence.
The theological argument of the text is that the highest form of ancient emptiness was idolatry. Trusting in fertility deity to bring rain is the ultimate delusion, because that deity possesses no actual existence.
It's just air.
It is a fabrication of the human mind. The altar might be made of solid limestone. The sacrifice might be very real, very expensive bull. The priest might be chanting real words. But the God receiving it all is a void. The space is unoccupied.
I am thinking about how to conceptualize this for us today. It's like banking your entire agricultural survival, the lives of your children, on a financial system that has no backing.
That's a great analogy.
It's like writing a massive check to pay off your mortgage from a bank account that does not exist. You can sign the check with incredible sincerity. You can use a fancy pen.
Right.
You can hand it to the bank teller with total confidence and a clear conscience.
But the check is going to bounce.
It will fail not because you weren't sincere, but because the account is Rick. It's empty. The delusion is thinking that your human sincerity somehow fills the metaphysical void.
That analogy clarifies the mechanics of idolatry perfectly. The tragedy of idolatry in the Hebrew mindset isn't simply that it breaks a religious rule, it is that it is structurally and fundamentally futile.
You get zero return on investment.
You are interacting with a fantasy. You are trying to draw water from a well that was never dug. And the danger of this delusion is contagious.
How so?
When a human mind becomes obsessed with a fantasy, when a person gives their profound love and devotion to an empty thing, the emptiness doesn't stay contained in the idol.
Oh, it spreads.
It eventually colonizes the worshiper. The void bleeds into the person. This brings us to the final and most personal evolution of the word in our sources.
We are moving into the realm of moral bankruptcy. We have gone from empty pots to empty actions to empty thoughts, and now we arrive at empty human beings.
The people themselves become the void.
We are looking now at the ethical and metaphorical use of the adjective rec, specifically in its plural form, rechem.
The lexicons define this usage in human terms as worthless, wicked, despicable, or unprincipled.
Very strong words.
When the Septuagint translators centuries later encountered this Hebrew word describing people, they used very strong Greek words too. They used loimos, which translates to pestilence or plague.
They called people a plague.
Yes. They also use scoli, which implies idleness or leisure, but in a highly negative, unproductive, parasitic sense.
Let's look at the historical narratives where these rekim, these worthless men, show up and cause chaos. In Judges 9.4, we have the story of Abimelech.
Gideon's son.
He wants to seize total power and make himself king over the city of Shechem. The text says the leaders of Shechem gave him silver from the temple of their idol, and Abimelech used it to hire worthless and reckless fellows to follow him.
They act as his personal mercenary squad.
With their help, he goes to his father's house and slaughters his own 70 brothers on a single stone.
The emptiness of the men enables the atrocity.
And we see a similar gathering in Judges 11.3. This is the story of Jephthah. He is an illegitimate son. Driven away from his inheritance by his half-brothers, he flees to the region of Tob on the fringes of society.
And who gathers around him?
The text says worthless men gathered around Jephthah and went out with him. They become a band of raiders, essentially a warlord's militia.
There is an excellent scholarly journal article by L.J.M. Claessens on the characterization in the Jephthah narrative that sheds light on the sociological realities here.
What does Claessens point out?
Claessens points out that in the ancient Near East, there was a specific class of marginalized people called the Habiru. These were outcasts, fugitives, mercenaries, people who had lost their land or were expelled from their kinship groups.
They operated outside the bounds of normal society.
Exactly.
Wait, I need to look into this for a second, because I think a modern reader might trip over this language. Is this ancient classism?
That's a very common question.
We know these men were outcasts. They had no land, no inherited wealth, no steady food supply. They were at the absolute bottom of the social ladder. So when the biblical text calls them worthless fellows, is it just a derogatory way of saying they are poor?
Are they punching down?
Right. Is the writer punching down at the lower class, or is this a genuine judgment on their internal character?
That is a crucial distinction to make, and the lexicons clarify it beautifully. It is absolutely true that the word can be used simply to describe financial poverty or being physically emptied of resources.
Okay, so it can just mean poor.
For instance, in Nehemiah 5.13, the governor Nehemiah shakes out his garment as a curse against those who exploit the poor, saying, Even thus may God shake out every man from his house. Thus may he be shaken out and emptied. The word there means impoverished.
Got it.
However, the commentaries agree that the usage in the books of Judges and Samuel regarding the Rikim is highly ethical, not merely economic. The theological word book of the Old Testament defines this specific application as men of no worth, especially in regards to righteous behavior.
So it's not about the state of their bank account or their land deeds. It is about the state of their soul.
That hits the mark. They are morally hollow. They have stripped away the covenantal laws, the ethics of their community, the basic obligations to their neighbors, and the fear of God.
They've emptied themselves of all of that.
By abandoning the covenant, they have created a moral vacuum inside themselves. This is vividly illustrated in a domestic dispute in 2 Samuel 6:20.
Oh, between David and Michelle.
Yes. King David has just brought the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. He is ecstatic. He is dancing with all his might before the Lord, wearing only a plain linen ephod rather than his royal robes.
And his wife is not happy.
His wife, Michal, the daughter of the former King Saul, comes out to meet him, and she is furious. She sarcastically praises him, saying the glorious King of Israel has uncovered himself today before the eyes of his servants' maids, as one of the worthless ones, Rikim, shamelessly uncovers himself.
I always read that as her just being embarrassed by his dancing, but she's using the specific word for an empty man.
She's calling him hollow.
She is accusing the king of acting devoid of the dignity, the ethical weight, and the moral gravity required of his office. She is comparing him to the unprincipled mercenaries.
She is weaponizing the concept of the void to insult his character. And the wisdom literature in the book of Proverbs cements this ethical definition.
Where in Proverbs do we see this?
Proverbs 12:11 and 28:19 both state a general principle. Whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who pursues vain things or associates with worthless persons, Requiem, lacks sense and will have plenty of poverty.
So the poverty follows the bad character.
In the logic of Proverbs, the physical poverty is the result of the moral emptiness, not the cause of it. The internal void eventually creates an external void.
It all connects back to the very beginning of our investigation. These requiem, these morally bankrupt men, function exactly like the empty pitchers Gideon used for his torches, or the empty plastered pit Joseph was thrown into.
They are human vessels entirely devoid of substance.
You look at them expecting to find humanity, ethics, reliability, truth, or covenant loyalty, and you find a void. The space is unoccupied.
If we synthesize all the material from our sources today, we see a terrifying progression in the Hebrew mind regarding the nature of reality.
It's a dark progression.
It starts with the physical dread of a dry well or a blighted, empty crop. Then it moves into the physical frustration of sweating over a field that yields nothing, the tragedy of futility.
And into the mind.
Then it infects the mind, causing people to place their trust in phantom gods and delusions that do not exist. And finally, the void hollows out the human being completely, leaving an unprincipled shell that causes violence and chaos in society.
The void is aggressive. It seeks to consume. It feels incredibly bleak when you lay the sources out like that. We have just spent all this time looking at texts that describe a world constantly threatened by starvation, exhausting futility, spiritual delusions, and morally bankrupt people.
It's a heavy topic.
The concept of reek and rick seems to swallow everything up like a black hole. But as we move to wrap up this investigation, the commentaries point us to a massive contrast in the text.
There's a light at the end of the tunnel.
There is one specific thing the ancient Hebrew text explicitly states is the absolute opposite of this emptiness.
We find this contrast in Deuteronomy 32:47.
Yeah.
The context here is monumental. Moses, the great prophet and leader, has just finished reciting a massive, sweeping song to the entire assembly of Israel.
Right before they go into the promised land.
They are right on the edge of it, and he is about to die.
Huh?
This song details their history, their frequent failures, their tendency toward idolatry, and God's sovereign covenant with them.
It's his final address.
After he finishes speaking all these words, he gives the people a final command to take the words to heart and teach them to their children. And then he says this regarding God's spoken word. For it is no empty word for you, but your very life.
No empty word. That phrase carries so much weight after everything we've discussed today. The expositor's Bible commentary notes on this verse highlight that the Word of God is not an idle, vain, or a worthless thing.
It is the direct antithesis of the vanisaristas, the empty, blighted grain of Pharaoh's dream.
The Word has substance.
Every other human pursuit we discussed today runs the massive risk of becoming void, The gathering of wealth can be lost to an invading army.
Trusting in fertility idols is a delusion that will leave you starving.
Military conquests are eventually burned with fire. You can pour your entire life into those vessels and receive absolutely nothing back.
But Moses assures the people that the revelation of God, his covenantal word, contains actual, unassailable substance.
It is not an unoccupied space. It is reality. To interact with it, to trust it, is to interact with life itself. The word is full.
That brings such a sharp focus to this entire deep dive. The lexicons and commentaries have shown us the vast, layered framework of ancient Hebrew thought regarding nothingness.
We see the dangers clearly.
We see how the language warns us about the dangers of living a life that is rick, a life spent laboring for the fire. But against all that physical and moral futility, the Word of God stands as something entirely full. It is the solid ground in a world of voids.
As we conclude our analysis of these sources, this raises an important question for you to consider on your own.
What's that?
Well, if the ancient Hebrew mind equated drawing a sword with physically emptying a scabbard, and idolatry with an empty fantasy, we have to look closely at our own lives.
We have to evaluate our own actions.
How much of our modern anxiety, our daily exhaustion, our burnout is simply the result of trying to pour substance out of vessels that we know, deep down, were empty all along?
That is a heavy thought to carry with you. Think about it the next time you pick up a cup expecting coffee, only to find it completely dry.
It's a small void, but it means a lot.
It's a small physical void, but it echoes a much larger human condition. Stop trying to drink from the empty pitchers. Thank you for joining the conversation on reformed thinking today. We love taking these sources and unpacking the weight of these ancient concepts with you. Until next time, keep your eyes open and keep seeking the substance that actually fills the void.